Yeah, so Hawkins and I, we are die-hard wrestling fans, die-hard wrestling figure fans, and I had been pitching him the idea, the concept of the podcast for at least a year or so before we actually started, and I think I just annoyed him enough that he just gave in. And last year we watched SummerSlam at his house, and afterwards we borrowed some of his equipment. It was actually Colt Cabana's original equipment, and we did a little pilot, and a year later, here we are.
It's unbelievable to think, like the guys in the business, oh, they can't be fans, but of course they're fans. I mean, most of them, especially you, that's kind of why you got into the business. You're such a big fan. What got you kind of hooked on doing the podcast? Because I notice a lot of podcasts, come and go, and you're like, oh, a wrestler will be interested in doing a podcast, and they kind of go away from. You guys are obviously invested in it for a long time, like you said, since basically last SummerSlam. What kind of keeps you interested and motivated in doing the podcast?
Well, I mean, to start, I knew I kind of was interested in podcasts. Obviously, I listen to podcasts, but like you said, so many wrestlers have podcasts, and so many wrestling podcasts are out there. So I didn't want to just have a wrestling podcast. I wanted it to be something special and something unique. And Hawkins and I, we're just BSing about figures anyway for hours a day. So I figured, why not turn this into a podcast, and let's see if there's any other figure collectors out there. And of course there are. And every week, once we finish recording, we're like, oh man, like we're not gonna have anything by next week. And then by the next week, we got tons of info. So we can always cover old figures, new figures, and we never run out of content.
Absolutely not. It's so cool to get guys like you that are on TV. They're very big names in wrestling, talking about stuff that so many fans were not nervous to talk about, but just kind of didn't talk about forever, whether they didn't want to admit they were figure collectors. Have you ever run into that yourself where you're like, I don't know if I want to admit that I'm such a big figure collector? You as a fan, sometimes you kind of deal with those people like, I don't want to admit I collect toys, or collect figures.
No, 100%, especially when I was in college. I was 18, 19, 20, going into a Toys R Us and buying toys, and I would always ask for the gift receipt and pretend it was a gift for somebody else. and then when Hawkins and I got signed to WWE, we were so young, and the guys on the roster were these grown men like JBL and Hardcore Holly and Undertaker, and they didn't grow up in a time where they were playing with wrestling figures, so we were the first of our generation. Now everyone's playing video games, everyone collects something, everyone's a fan of something. So now it's way more accepted, but there's no way 10 years ago I could be like, hey, Hardcore Holly, you want to be a guest on the Major Wrestling Figure Podcast? They'd kick me out of the locker room.
That is so true, and it is funny kind of see the evolution and where it's come. What was the first kind of set or the first toys you got into? Was it LJN?
Yeah, it was LJN figures. I was super young. I don't remember. People ask me all the time. I don't remember the first match I watched. I don't remember the first figure I had. All I remember is that my whole childhood, ever since I was basically a baby, involved wrestling and being obsessed with wrestling and the wrestling figures. I still have all my childhood LJNs, and if you look at them, they're all beat up. I was playing with them, and I was even like biting the fingers off. I was using them as like killing toys.
Yeah. Yep. Had so many experiences with that with my LJNs. I mean, the noses are off, the fingers are off. They're all beaten to hell.
Those things were indestructible.
I remember using King Kong Bundy specifically as a weapon to beat up my brother because that thing was like, it literally weighed like 20 pounds.
I was about to say, you could do some serious damage with a King Kong Bundy LJN.
Such a cool thing to start off with. I was obsessed with Hogan when I was younger, and after you had to have his LJN. Was there a kind of a set or maybe a couple guys you always played with?
Definitely, Hogan was my favorite growing up, and I was very fortunate to have the majority of the set. I didn't realize until later in life about the black cards, like Haku and Big Boss and Recruit. I didn't even know those existed until I was a little older. So I had pretty much everybody, and I would always have my we call them Big Feds and my Fantasy Wrestling Federation, and I just loved, building these cards and having them walk down the aisle and have matches. I was very much into the storylines and the title histories, even as a very young kid.